Yo guys, what is up? Max on our First Descendant video, and today we were talking about one of the strongest, if not the strongest weapon in the First Descendant right now. We're going to be going over my build guide and how to acquire it. That weapon is none other than the Tamer, which is just an absolute monster of a machine gun. We're going to be talking about how to build this thing, the pros and cons, and everything else that you need to know. I hope you enjoy the video. Let's get right into it. Real quick, before we go over everything that you need to know, 82% of the people that watch my videos are not subscribed. I don't take many ads on my YouTube. So there's not really any ads that are ever going to play during these First Descendant videos. But if you want to support me, it really does help hitting that subscribe button. All right, with that, let's get into it. So the Tamer is a machine gun that runs with general rounds, that has some of the highest DPS out of any of the weapons in the game. The only weapons that you'll find with higher DPS than the Tamer, for the most part, are heavy weapons such as sniper rifles, rocket launchers, and shotguns. But those usually you run into ammo issues with unless you're playing a character like Enzo. So for a lot of people and a lot of builds and a lot of players, the Tamer is going to be one of your highest, if not your highest, general DPS option that you can have. If you found this thing while leveling, you probably noted just how strong it was. But the Tamer is not without its downsides. The biggest downside of this gun is while you are aimed down sights or while you're shooting it, you are incredibly slow. So this is my walking speed or running speed. If as soon as I aim down sights, I am very, very, very slow. If I start shooting, I'm just as slow. But it is the big downside of this weapon. It makes it so that if you are playing solo and you're a squishy character, you're probably going to be taking some damage from bosses and enemies because you're not going to be able to jump around and kite their damage as much unless you're kind of doing that in between your shots. Just something to note that this weapon particularly excels on tanky characters like Ajax, Kyle, characters that can draw aggro for you like Jaber. Tanky characters like Glay are also really solid with this thing. I've personally built my bunny to be very tanky. I will have an updated guide on it tomorrow. We're rocking around like 10k HP and 25k defense. So I've been using it on my bunny as well. But just note that you are most likely going to take a little bit more damage while using this thing because you're going to have a harder time avoiding damage. The next thing that's so great about the Tamer is it's a rare weapon. So unlike a legendary, which costs a lot to upgrade, infuse, and roll the stats of, the Tamer is just a rare weapon, meaning it uses its own resource for your weapon readjustments. So if we go over to the Tamer, it's going to be using these adjustment control axes. These you can craft 20 of. I think they take like 10 minutes to craft. And you can just basically roll this until you get perfect stats. Mine rolled pretty much exactly what I was looking for. The biggest stat that you're going to try to find is firearm attack percentage damage. That plus an element, and you're going to be doing really well. I rolled some extra weak point damage and some more crit damage. Ideally, this crit damage is crit chance, but it's not the end of the world. It is what it is. But because it's a purple weapon, it's a lot easier to try to find a god roll and a lot less expensive than if you're trying to roll something like a Thunder Cage or another legendary. Now let's talk weapon builds. Now I wanted to start by showing you the big flashy number. I only have a few mods on mine. I've basically given it one reactor and one catalyst. Obviously, you would need to heavily invest into this thing. We're using a bunch of expensive mods. But this thing, if you fully catalyst it up and put a reactor on, I think would easily break over 500,000 DPS a second. I think with just one more catalyst, we're going to be over 500,000 damage, which is absurd. It is incredibly powerful. And I wanted to show you guys my crit setup first. Because the number looks bigger, but I don't think it's the actual proper way to build this weapon, and we'll talk about that in a second. So with this weapon, the two mods that I really am prioritizing on basically any build is Rifling Reinforcement for 32% increased base damage, and Action and Reaction for increased damage. Adds a little bit of recoil. It's not really noticeable with this weapon. It's actually pretty low recoil. So these are contributing to a ton of damage. This weapon is a little bit slower firing, so fire rate up is a must-have. This gives us a ton of fire rate, tons of extra DPS, and that's kind of the core of your setup. Rifling, action and reaction, and fire rate. The other ways to build it are either to build it around crit, using better insight for more crit rate, better concentration for more crit damage, and insight focus for more crit rate and more crit damage. And if we tab over to this screen, you'll see that I have a 15% crit chance on this weapon with when I crit, I'm going to be dealing about 3 times my damage, which is insane. So that's what's pushing up the DPS number really high. However, 15% crit is not all that great, and it taught me something about learning about the weapons and the different types of weapons in this game, and that is that LMGs just don't have very good base crit. So for example, if we were to go over and look at this different Dream sniper rifle, it's got no mods on it. We tab over. This sniper rifle has a 55% base crit rate. So obviously building crit on this sniper is really good. Building crit on an LMG, while it makes the damage look really good, in our testing is actually not the best way to build it. So that's why I wanted to show you my weak point build. The number isn't as flashy, it doesn't look as cool, but in our testing, this kills bosses faster than the crit build, and that is mainly because LMGs don't have a very great base crit chance, so it makes more sense to build them towards weak spots. I obviously haven't like fully invested into this quite yet. We've been testing around with it, but if we go down to this stats, our weak point damage is going to be 1.5x, meaning that anytime that we hit a weak point with this weapon, we're going to be doing 50% more damage against those weak points. This is massive because you can just spray into weak points on bosses. You do need to be a little bit closer with this weapon. It's not the most accurate thing, but a lot of bosses do have bigger hitboxes. I do plan, once we have things like more like better capacity and more formas, to maybe throw in like an actual accuracy mod to make it more accurate so that we're hitting more weak points more often. But I just wanted to point this out because putting together like weak point sight for 30% more weak point damage, things like weak point insight for another 20% weak point damage, and then tossing on an element, maybe a faster like reload speed. I'm going for elements here so that we can like constantly swap this thing up for bosses, because right now it's got fire, which is great. Then we can put chill. We're already covering 2 elements, and then I've got my like thunder cage for lightning. So that's kind of the way that I've been rocking it right now. But if you are to optimally build this, even though the number does not look as good, I'm telling you that the weak point is probably the better way to build this weapon. You're going to end up with faster boss kills and higher overall DPS, even though it just doesn't quite look like that. Now, to actually acquire the Tamer, you do have a few options, kind of depending on what point of the game, or the stage of the game that you're in. One of the first places that I found was White Knight Gulch. You can come over to White Knight Gulch, and then if you come to the observatory and then the orders occupied facility, you can scroll down. Here's a 50% chance to find a Tamer. Remember that if you pick it up a lower level and you are a higher level, you can always infuse it up to like 100. But this is a great mission to get a bunch of them, 50% drop chance, and you can try to find your like god roll or just find one and then upgrade it. They do drop at level 100 from the Executioner boss. That's where I got my one that I've been using on this build. And there are a few other places to find them. The other place is the Void Fusion Reactor in White Knight Gulch. This is another spot that I found. This is also a 50% chance to drop the Tamer. I do think that there's another place earlier in the game to find this. So if you know, let me know down below in the comments and I can make it a pinned comment. But these are so far the main places that I've found to go farm the Tamer. Guys, that is going to do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. I will have an updated bunny build for like hard mode endgame out tomorrow, and then we're going to be working on our next descendants, either probably Freyna or Glay or Valby is kind of what I'm gearing towards. But yeah, guys, that's it for the video. I'll catch you on the next one. Take care. Bye.